Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's event on women in the U.S. military, which we're proud to hold on International Women's Day. My name is Bilal Saab. I run the Defense and Security Program at MEI, and I'm the author of an upcoming book on rebuilding Arab defense, U.S. security cooperation in the Middle East. For the next hour, it will be my pleasure to moderate a discussion with three women I deeply admire, who also happen to be members of the Defense and Security team at the Middle East Institute. And their names are Katie Cromby, Melissa Horvath, and Erin Moffitt. Katie, Melissa, and Erin are in a very good position to discuss the topic of women in the US military, in large part because they have direct experience in this issue. So let me introduce them very briefly. And as I said, all three of them are non-resident experts in MEI's Defense and Security Program. But in addition to that, Lieutenant Colonel Katie Cromby is currently the Director of Strategy and Plans in U.S. Special Operations Command Central. She has extensive experience in CENTCOM, and she was deployed to the Middle East for various strategy and planning assignments, including in recent years, the de-ISIS campaign. Melissa Horvath is another CENTCOM alumnus, where she focused on logistics as a planner. And for much of her career, she has specialized in U.S. security cooperation in the Middle East, my kind of topic. And currently, she is director of the International Trade Group at Commonwealth Trading Partners, CTP Inc. And just like Katie, Melissa had multiple deployments to the region. Erin is a career defense and national security professional. She's currently a senior analyst at the Center for Counterterrorism Studies within Joint Special Operations Command. She has held multiple jobs in the Pentagon, including in the Office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations Low Intensity Conflict, that's SOLIC. And like Katie, she worked in the U.S. Embassy in Amman, Jordan, coordinating interagency and partner nation efforts to respond to the Syrian refugee crisis, among various other assignments that she's held. Of course, there's a lot more that these speakers have accomplished throughout their careers, and I'm only mentioning 10% of it. So if you're curious about their impressive resumes, I urge you please to consult their bios on the MEI website. Just a couple of administrative notes, ladies, before we start. This is an on-the-record conversation broadcast live on YouTube and on our website. And if time permits, and I hope it does, I will be taking questions from the audience. And so with that, let's start with, shall we, maybe opening remarks from each and one of you, recognizing that today is International Women's Day. So maybe just a few words from you, and then we can get to the substance. So I'll just go by screen. Katie, why don't you start?
Thanks so much for having us, Bilal. Happy International Women's Day to everyone. I'm extremely excited to be here and on this panel of distinguished colleagues. And I can't help but, for once, we are representative of what we are talking about. So it's International Women's Day. We're all three women who have served in the Middle East. And I think that in and of itself is a huge tribute. This is also, just as a reminder, the 100th year anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote. So I think it's an important year for us. And I hope that the role that women are playing right now in our national security apparatus brings us to some sort of resolution with what's going on right now in the world. So over to you, Bilal.
Perfect. Thank you, Katie. Melissa?
Okay. Thank you, Bilal, for having us. I'm very excited to be here. I think it's a great time to just pause and recognize the accomplishments of the women that came before us, the trailblazers that paved the way, as well as the women that are still out there day to day getting things done, and those that are young, coming up, aspiring to serve in similar positions. So thank you, and I look forward to our discussion.
Excellent. Erin?
Thank you so much to Bilal and to the Middle East Institute for hosting this event. I'm incredibly humbled to be sharing this hour with the other two women on the panel with me. I have to say, on International Women's Day, I have worked in the national security space now for almost 20 years, and there is definitely work to be done, certainly, but it's also been incredible to see the strides that we have made over the last 2 decades. I'm definitely heartened. I see the women that have come before me, but also the women that are coming behind me, and just the opportunities that they have and the barriers that no longer exist for them. And it's incredible. And it gives me great hope for the future. So thank you.
Perfect. Actually, let me start with a confession before we get to the substance. Because I thought it would be far more appropriate to have actually a female moderator. I tried very hard, but I failed miserably. Believe me, it's not for lack of trying. So ended up with me. I hope I could do a good job at this, but I just wanted to mention that for anybody who's watching, and to you guys, since I didn't mention that to you before. Okay, let me start with a straightforward question, or maybe it's not that straightforward, which is this gender gap in the US national security system. Does it actually exist? And if so, and just from your own different perspectives about it, if it's not a straightforward answer, tell me more about this gender gap in the US national security system. So I'll just go with the same order. Let's start with Katie.
Thanks, Paul. And as Aaron alluded to, I think we have come an incredibly long way. So I do not want to overlook that by any means, but I definitely believe that there still is a gap. We have a female vice president, and a number of women on the cabinet. I think almost half, if not half, are women. And so that is not something that we should overlook on any day. I would say within the military writ large, women make up only 16% of the overall military, but only 6% of four-star generals. And the four-star generals and the joint chiefs of staff are where the decisions get made. That's where people get around the table and they talk about everything from strategy to tactics, usually focused on strategy. But I think that until that sort of table is represented by women, and I'm not talking, let's have a transformation and say that 50% of the table needs to have women on it. I'm talking a slow evolution that has a female voice that represents 50% of the world. We are not going to be able to make great strides until that occurs.
Melissa, you've heard those numbers. They're not very encouraging as far as percentages. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I think as Katie said, the numbers, while not encouraging, have definitely been improving, and you can't change a culture overnight, even within our own culture. So you could legislate or mandate 50% of people sitting at the leadership table have to look like this or be like this, but I don't personally think that's a very good way to do things. So as we've evolved and seen more women in these leadership positions, I think we're headed in the right direction. I think we're recruiting more, but the retention and keeping the women in to the point where they can ascend to those higher positions and be represented at that leadership table is probably where we have the most work to do.
Okay. Aaron, you're probably going to get the more difficult part of this question, but before I go to you for a second, Katie, did the Department of Defense actually publish these numbers? Are they available?
I read that in a Brookings Institute study that came out in 2020. And so I'm sure the numbers are a little bit better now. Every year it increases. But I think that, within the last year and a half, those came out, and be happy to share that link with everyone as well.
Fair enough. Okay. Aaron, so the gender gap does exist. The more difficult question is why?
Katie and Melissa already touched on representation. I think it's incredibly important. So I'm just going to really quickly hit what I think are the three key issues. Representation, absolutely. I think Katie's 100% correct. We need more women in the senior ranks of the military. And I think that means that we have to recognize that women might not be able to adhere to linear career paths. And we have to find ways to accommodate them so that they can continue with their careers, perhaps even after they've had a family. I also think when studies have shown when women don't see themselves in the leadership of an organization, they're less likely to stay. So I think that hits on the retention point that Melissa brought up. While we may be attracting women at lower levels, certainly we aren't retaining them. That's problematic. And then I think the two other things are gendered heuristics and cognitive bias. Those certainly exist. And then recruitment. I think we still have very antiquated notions when it comes to recruiting of what types of people we want and need. I think a great example of this is in 2021 when the Army released a new series of recruitment videos called The Calling, in which they showcase real soldiers, mind you, from very diverse backgrounds. It received huge backlash. A senator who shall not be named referred to them as woke and emasculating. So I think that's highly problematic. So yeah, I think those are kind of like the three key issues.
Okay. What are some of the most critical issues that women in U.S. national security roles face, particularly those in the U.S. military? Katie, let's go back to you.
I think it's probably, in the opportunity for advancement, as we've continued to touch on. And I think both Erin and Melissa hit that. It's in those middle years that we lose most of our talent, right? And it's in the childbearing years. Those are also the most critical career years. We call them our field grade years, which is really when you make a name for yourself, that kind of major lieutenant colonel, or on the NCO side of the house, kind of staff sergeant first class. That's where you make your name. And
Right.
So you have two sides of the coin. Either you're hesitant to have a family, or if you do have a family, you almost remove yourself on purpose from some of the leadership positions because you're afraid that you're going to fail by not dedicating enough time to it. So the other side of that coin is really looking at a promotion system that can accommodate something like that. Because what we've done, and this is hugely helpful, is started to offer sabbaticals. So women can get out for a couple of years, and then they come in at a different year group, we call them, right? So it doesn't hurt their career so much, but in many ways, you do see that gap. You do, it's like a resume, right? You see those 2 or 3 years, what were they doing at the time? And it's very difficult culturally to say that people are going to overlook those sorts of things in a promotion board. And when they were out of, service for those couple of years, I guarantee that the balancing act and the time management and the negotiating tactics they were using with children on a daily basis will pay dividends, later on when you're sitting at a negotiation table in the Middle East, or the 4-star table. Those types of life skills do carry. And so until we can account for those types of things in promotions and promote people earlier and not have, right now we offer kind of a 1 or 2 year early promotion if you've hit all the wickets and you're on this perfect command track. That probably isn't enough moving forward to retain the type of talent we want to and the type of skill sets that women often come with.
Can you tell us a little bit, Katie, about your own personal experience in this? You do have kids, right? You have 2 kids.
I do. Yes. I have 2 kids that I had, and then I have 2 wonderful stepkids too. So we've raised 4 kids.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't take any time off, it wasn't really offered with my first child. And then with my second one, I didn't know about it. Looking back, to be very honest, I don't know if I would change my decision and take that time off, just because I know that, staying on the career path has helped me. I think that out of any skill that I've developed in the military, any school I've been to, any deployment that I have embarked on, raising children is far and away my greatest lesson and greatest humbling experience. And I think it is what connects me to both men and women in the Middle East, especially, who find family so important. And it's something that we have a common lexicon on, and then we can talk about families. So, it's the best thing that ever happened to me. I wouldn't change a thing, but I still don't think that it is those type of softer skills are recognized.
Copy. Okay. Thank you, Katie. Melissa, your own thoughts, your own experience.
Yeah, I think I may have had a very similar experience. I didn't have children in the early years of my service, so I was right around that mid-level major, mid-career, 10 years in, kind of that break point when everyone's got to decide, I'm still young enough to get out of the service and pursue a civilian career, but if I stay in for another 10 years, I can hit the retirement point. And that was right around the time that I started my family. When I had my second child, I was at Fort Bragg in a battalion XO position and just really hustling an almost unbearably demanding schedule. And the Army did something that I thought was really great and let me go to school during that time. So all the timing aligned. It coincided with my staff college, my professional military education. Originally, I had made the assumption, because you have to do a fitness test when you show up, there's no way they're going to let me go. And they said, no, this actually sounds like a great plan. What better place to be pregnant than do it while you're in school in an academic setting? And I think maybe if I had had the choice to take a year or 2 off at that point, I may have made that decision. I
Right.
either wasn't aware of it or it wasn't an option. And in hindsight, I'm very glad that I decided to press through. It got harder before it got easier, but I think more options would perhaps help us retain those people that are on the fence that just don't know what they want to do or leaning more towards the side of getting out to pursue the civilian career path and more of that work-life balance.
Got it. Okay. Erin, floor is yours.
Melissa and Katie pretty much covered, I think, the difficulties certainly of having a family and being in the military. I will say one thing though, I think that we don't talk enough about and should be part of the dialogue is, I think we talk a lot about what we can do for women. We put the onus of the burden of most of having a family on women, essentially, right? It's like, oh, should we give women a year instead of 12 weeks? Or I think this is a issue where there needs to be more burden sharing. I think it's very interesting that in the private sector, in companies where men are given equal paternity leave as women, so 4 months, they're very reticent to take it because they're very worried about what stepping away for 4 months will do to their career. Women don't have that luxury, right? And so you have these men that are like, oh, like, I don't know if I can step away for 12 weeks. And yet we're saying a solution might be having a woman step away for a year without realizing potentially the negative consequences of that. And so I think just ensuring that when we talk about, like how to make it so that women can continue to have career and also family, that we don't make women feel like it's 100% their burden. I think that is very difficult. And I don't think we talk enough about burden sharing when it comes to that.
Thank you, Erin. So as you make the case for greater representation of women in U.S. national security, and even more broadly, increased roles and responsibilities, could you help us better understand what unique skills and perspectives do women bring to the table in terms of shaping the security strategies and policies that impact women across the globe? Katie, we'll go back to you.
Sure. I think that I would probably use 3 words. Listen would be the first one. I think that women are great listeners. Although the best boss I ever worked for, also a member of the Middle East Institute, General Joe Votel, is the world's best listener, and that's how he leads. But I think inherently, if you're on an equal scale, women are good listeners. I think that that's just critical in all leadership, especially international and international security. When a lot of what you are doing is trying to understand someone else's point of view, it almost doesn't matter what your point of view is. So if you don't go in, with the old adage, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, that you really must use that. And I do think that women kind of inherently have that. Also, we are good negotiators. And I think that's kind of from a younger age. I just think that we're more willing to kind of see both sides of an argument. I don't know if it's kind of a nature or nurture thing, but I often see that it doesn't, when women are negotiating, I feel that it doesn't come with such drama with it. You don't have this burden or as much an air in the room when we're negotiating. And then the last thing, it's related, is compromise. And I think often when you think of kind of sharp elbows and people in rooms making big decisions, compromise can sometimes look like a bad thing. I think if we're all watching the news that we're all glued to right now, I think that people will be falling over themselves for anyone to compromise at this point, right? And so some of the skills that women bring with them are not always seen right away as a powerful leadership skill. And I think it's, that is part of changing culture in the military, but being aggressive or lethal, while obviously necessary in some battles and in some boardrooms, I think on a day-to-day basis, it's more of the negotiation, compromise, and listen that really helps women.
Okay. Melissa, to you.
I've amazingly had cooperating and compromising written down as skills that I've seen, that studies have shown that women excel in. And while not stereotyping or saying this is hard and fast about everyone all the time, I tend to agree with what Katie said, that men are a little bit more competitive in those environments, and women bring that cooperation and compromise. there's studies that show women lawmakers tend to reach out across the aisle and pass legislation. Women negotiators, in the same vein, are better, as Katie said, listeners, cooperators, and negotiators, which leads to results in the end. So I think those, I don't like to call them soft skills, because in a military setting, no one wants to be called soft, but those skills are things that women do bring to the table and are very effective in shaping strategy and policy, and in just making those human connections needed to do so.
Thank you, Melissa. Erin, are we forgetting anything?
No, I mean, I think at the very micro level, those are probably great examples. And I think just overarching, like bottom line, teams that reflect gender balance have been shown time and time again to produce better results. So I think in terms of a reason why you want to have a balanced team, there's no greater, I think, emphasis in that.
Okay, thank you. You know, I'm taking notes. I'm already feeling insecure and vulnerable. Okay. How does the increased role of women in military service, including combat roles, give them a unique perspective on conflict and security issues and their effect on women? Katie.
Of course. So we've expanded the aperture for women when they join the military to come into any job they want. So my oldest stepdaughter, she is now a cavalry scout in the 82nd Airborne Division. You know, just turned 20, only female in her platoon, crushing it. This was not available to me or Erin or Melissa when we came in, and I'm sure we would have all been chomping at the bit back in the day when we were in shape and not tired. But, you know, having that opportunity and seeing her go through that is just, it's everything that the three of us joined the military to kind of create behind us, right? And I think seeing that come to fruition is a beautiful thing. Break, there's still struggles that come with that, right? And like we discussed earlier, when you don't want it to be a 50% quota or enforce a quota, we all need to be very patient, I think, and let women's incorporation, especially into combat arms roles, evolve. You know, it doesn't need to be transformative overnight. It needs to be evolutionary, and let people slowly kind of come to terms with what they bring to the table. I think that's true. I think the younger generations, this is much easier for them. They're going to grow up like that. But for people that are senior leaders and mid-level leaders, you have to slowly let this evolve. And I think that's the only way that people kind of have agency about it and are supportive about it, if it's not forced down their throat and they see the goodness, they see what people bring to the table.
Copy. Thank you, Katie. Melissa?
Yeah, I think to take that a step further, what appealed to me 20 years ago about the military was the fact that it was described as a meritocracy, right? So you're judged, you advance based on your merit, your hard work, your accomplishments, and in an ideal world on nothing else. I mean, that's not to say that there's not inherent biases and that we haven't all experienced those. But by and large, and compared to, I think, a lot of civilian organizations, my experience has been that you do well, you're recognized, you move up. So as more positions open, and I didn't know that about your daughter, Katie, congratulations. You must be so proud. That's very cool. I 20 years ago would have loved to have those opportunities. I think we'll see that, you know, just like the men, women will prove themselves. Not everyone makes the cut. Not everyone exceeds, but the women that do will pave the way for more, and that's how change happens. So I think the opening of the combat roles, that unique perspective, will just accelerate that change.
Okay, Erin?
I think a really prescient example of why we need the unique perspective of women is cultural support teams. I encourage everybody, if you haven't, to read the book Ashley's War by Gail Lamone. It's an incredible book. It tells a story of the second class of women to go through cultural support team training. And I think that this tool that was developed by Special Operations Command was born out of a necessity, but certainly a blindness. I think the fact that we were initially sending, special forces ODAs to Afghanistan comprised of 12 men, without thinking about the fact that these groups would not be able to access 50% of the population. I mean, that's a huge blindness. And I think that cultural support teams are a great example of how women can be a force multiplier. They were able to access people and places that were otherwise out of reach. And so I think that's a really great example.
Okay. Before I move on to the next question, only because this really relates to what you're talking about now, I just want to take a question from Sandy Bolzenius. Sandy, I know I'm butchering your last name, so forgive me. She says, I'm curious if our presenters feel that women in the US military are having an appreciably different, read more humanitarian impact during national security discussions and on the ground in conflict areas. Carrie, do you want to take that? Katie. Katie.
I can be whatever you want me to be.
No, Katie's good.
I was actually listening to a podcast about this week, not about that exact question, but related to that question this weekend. And there was some statistics in there talking about negotiators and signatories to international peace negotiations, and how it's an abysmal percentage are women, around about 10%. But that the negotiations that incorporated women into the decision tree held far and away more than the ones that were just represented by men, and longer. So just the longevity of them as well. And so it kind of goes back to, I think, one of the points that Aaron made earlier, that it's just, the different voices around the table are really what you need. And that's what helps you reach these better decisions. But in this podcast, there was a great example. So it was some negotiations surrounding the South Sudan conflict in the last decade. And there were all the men sitting around the negotiating table, and women were somehow involved. I didn't kind of find out the whole story. They're like outside the main room, but we're kind of getting the break line stories in the margins when they took breaks. So they had been in there for hours and hours and hours. They come out and the women are like, hey, what's the deal? What are you guys still fighting over? Because the last time they walked in, they were about to sign this thing. And the guy said, well, we can't agree on who has access to this river, who owns this river. And all the women started laughing. And they said, that river dried up years ago. There's no water in that river. And so the moral of the story was that these women in the villages were going down to obviously wash their clothes, bathe their children, what have you, in the river. And so they knew what the village needed. They knew what the leadership actually needed. Mm-hmm. And the men, although not wrong, they were just disconnected from that part of the problem set, and therefore the decision tree. So it's not about who's right or wrong. Mm-hmm. It's about who has the best information. And the best information is usually from a group of people. And so if they had one of those women in the room, the moral was that river would not have been argued about and the negotiation would have been passed that morning.
Yep. Melissa, Aaron, did you want to add anything to that, or?
No, I think just to reinforce what Aaron brought up about the cultural support teams and mm-hmm. some of my personal experiences, particularly serving in Iraq in the mid-2000s, where it was before CSTs, or the cultural support teams were really instituted as a formal unit at the brigade level. And this happened, I think, all across the Army, probably in Afghanistan as well. They would pull female service members to go out and go talk to the women. Even if you were out, hey, that lady wants something, go find out what she wants. Obviously you had to have language skills. And then, well, it didn't necessarily translate into a humanitarian mission. It also brought the considerations and the needs of that part of the population into our planning and into the operations at that level. So the access and the information were critical, and the women that were integrated in all different military occupational specialties, they could have been mechanics, they could have been truck drivers, were pulled to go access, talk to, interact with, and engage that part of the population. And I think that it paid dividends on what might have been a very tactical or small scale, but I think higher echelons recognize the value of that, and that's how we got to the constructs like the cultural support teams.
Erin, you good?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right. Let's bring up the subject of Ukraine. I am confident all of you are closely following the news and events in that tragic conflict. You're all seeing that women are playing some pretty significant roles in that conflict, not just caring for children and their spouses, but also some very interesting resistance efforts against the Russian forces. But it's not just in this particular conflict, but also in the previous one in 2014 with the war in Crimea. Could you identify some lessons that we could be learning from this particular conflict and then try to apply it more broadly? Katie?
Sure. I'm definitely watching the news, but I'm not an expert on the Ukraine by any means.
Me neither.
Yeah, I would just say that in anything, if you go back to the OSS, OSS turns into special forces and, made it what it is today. Good leaders find the right people for the job, gender independent. And I believe that's what's going on right now. And not only that, but these women are proud and they want to protect their country, and they've seen what it looked like before democracy and what it looked like afterwards. And they have a stake in it. They have a future for their children behind them, and they want to be at that negotiating table. And I think they see the path to that is probably by joining the fight. I think Erin has a lot of good expertise in this with, all of her civil affairs. So I will cede my time to her.
Fair enough. Melissa?
Yeah, I think very quickly, the challenge is we see a lot of times in a crisis, whether, as Katie mentioned, the OSS or the Kurdish Peshmerga or all-female battalions that fought ISIS, even now in the Ukraine, women rising to the challenge, stepping up, defending their country. I think the bigger challenge is after the conflict is over, retaining that skill set, retaining their talents, making sure they have a seat at that negotiating table, and not just letting them rejoin society without recognizing their contributions and making an effort to retain them within the organizations. So while they play a critical role during conflict, I think we also need to look at ways to retain their talents during peacetime. And I'll let Erin, who knows more than I do about it,
There you go. Perfect segue. Erin.
Yeah, my background is in irregular warfare. So, I look at what's happening in the Ukraine and, I'm very heartened by it. I think that what Ukraine learned in 2014, when Russia went into the Donbass region, is what they're again realizing today is they can't afford to discriminate, right? And so 2016, 2 years after the Donbass incursion, same year that Ash Carter opened all jobs in the US military to women, that is when women could formally be in combat roles in the Ukrainian military, which is pretty incredible. And I think that if you want to extrapolate it even larger, I know looking past what we're seeing in the Ukraine, but also just more broadly, I think the central lesson should truly be in a world where I think the ability to maintain a competitive advantage may be razor thin, we can't afford to leave talent on the table. And I think that that is probably what we should take away from what we're seeing in the Ukraine with regards to just gender.
Cornelia Weiss, retired 06, has a recommendation for you, and I wonder what your thoughts are. She says, I hope the panelists are applying for in-residence war college, be it in your military or civilian status. Any thoughts on that?
Tell her thank you. I'm actually headed to war college this summer in July. I'm up in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and hopefully I can bring my 2 friends with me. Okay.
Any other thoughts on this? No? Okay. Katie, Erin, on January 31st of this year, you wrote an article for MEI entitled Reassessing Women's Role in Peace and Security in the Middle East. Could you please share with the audience what is the bottom line of the piece, your core argument, essentially, and then if you could speak a little bit about this March 2021 study by the Center for Naval Analyses, which seems to be a pretty important study, and you reference it in your article. And then from that study, as sort of a part two to this question, are there any lessons learned for what we call now in the Department of Defense strategic competition moving forward? So with China and Russia. So Katie, I'll start with you.
Sure, and Aaron and I can go back and forth on this, but I would say the bottom line of our article is that the Women, Peace and Security Act was signed in 2017 and made great strides. The basis of the document is something we've never had before, and the bottom line is Congress identified that women are critical in the national security arena. So there's nothing bad there. What we believe it overlooked and that we can evolve to with different legislation is looking at women's role in the center of the conflict. So we often talk, like Melissa said, about the softer tasks, so conflict prevention and conflict resolution and negotiating, because women do have those skills and inherently bring a lot to the table. But it overlooks something that happens in war. It's happening right now, and it definitely happened with ISIS, and that is that women are also combatants. So women played a huge role in the advent of ISIS and continue to in Al-Hol camp. So, not only do they kind of man, train, equip, feed, facilitate the fighters, they are part of the fighters. And in the Arab culture, women are so, as you know, I'm preaching to the choir here, are so important. And especially when it comes to the ideology and what people are talking about and thinking about on a daily basis. And so I know one struggle that we often talk about right now related to the Al-Hol camp in Syria is, you never want to tear a child away from his mother or a mother away from her child. But the complicated question is, what if the woman is the one imparting this horrible ideology onto the child? That's a tightrope that we are struggling with, and that the NGO community, DoD, the diplomats, USAID are going to continue to struggle with until we determine kind of the way forward with that.
Aaron, since you're a co-author, what would you like to add to that?
Yeah, just to echo Katie's sentiment that there definitely, 2017 NDAA, very deliberate language, then the subsequent 2019 US strategy on women, peace and security. So yes, I think at the strategic levels, this has been internalized. I think the problem is in some ways, and the CNA study touched upon this, I was actually in Solik when Shaw was charged with ushering this study. I think the problem, one, is that the department was a little behind the power curve in terms of recognizing the roles that women play with regards to extremist organizations, right? I think that people in the NGO space, certainly at USAID and in the State Department, had already internalized these lessons, and they knew that women were not just recipients of violence, but also perpetrators, and that women play outsized roles, right? Women recruit, they fundraise, and they build social networks. And so, and in some instances, I think even moving outside of the ecological model, the role of mothers in terms of either being a catalyst for someone to join an extremist organization or actually being the reason why someone might not, right? And so these are all things I think across other sections of the government had already been internalized. So I think the department was a little slow to do so. And then looking forward, I think that, again, what we can apply more broadly is that a lot of the issues came, I think, because the interventions or the ways that we went about crafting strategy were done so on the backs of gender stereotypes, right? Again, going back to heuristics. And I think moving forward, we need to recognize that this is why we need to bulwark against things like groupthink. This is why it's important to have, conversations that are comprised of people that are representative of larger segments of the population. We say over and over again, diverse teams are stronger teams, and yet we still have teams that are not representative, I think, of a non-homogeneous population segment. So I think moving forward, and we're definitely headed in the right direction, right? We have a woman DepSecDef, which is incredible. There are more women in the Department of Defense at senior levels than ever before, surely. We have our first Deputy Assistant Secretary for Regular Warfare and Combating Terrorism that is a woman. So the department is certainly headed in the right direction in terms of ensuring that as we look forward to strategic competition, we are crafting strategy that I think is representative of a wide array of experiences and certainly voices.
Not to mention that we got this close to having a SecDef female.
I didn't want to say it, but yeah.
Well, maybe next time. Melissa, I know I said I wasn't going to talk about your article, but I'm trying to find any excuse to further promote it because it was a terrific piece for MEI. And you were talking about the importance of logistics and its impact on deterrence in the Middle East. So happy to hear more about the argument of that piece, but also what I want to hear from you, just to try to relate it to the subject of this conversation, is you mentioned to me before we went on air that this might be one area, hopefully it's not the only one, where having female logisticians and planners is more promising than in other areas in terms of representation of females. Could you speak a little bit about that, given your personal experience in that field? And then just, once again, just in a sentence or two, tell us what the core argument of that piece is. So, and you're seeing it live in terms of the importance of logistics in the Ukraine conflict, right? And the massive difficulties of the Russian armed forces. So just tell us what your argument was in that piece, and then speak to the issue of females as far as logisticians in CENTCOM, at least.
Okay, I'll try and make that stretch. So after spending 4 years at CENTCOM as a logistics planner, and what we saw over those 4 years was the drawdown in the theater, whether that was in Iraq or Afghanistan, both a lot of assets, combat units, fighter squadrons, air and missile defense assets were being pulled out of the CENTCOM AOR and sent to other theaters that ranked higher on the priority list in terms of our national defense strategy, and rightfully so. So we were really challenged to do more with less, the proverbial do more with less, and develop a strategy that integrated more than just the combat power into deterring our adversaries in the region. So a colleague of I took a look at the totality of what we had planned for the 3 to 4 years we had been at CENTCOM, and really looked at integrating logistics activities, whether that was exercising. We looked at engineering, because in our command, the engineers were integrated with the logisticians in terms of posture, basing. We could downsize, but be more dispersed, be more agile, show up for exercises and episodic employments, deployments where we were unexpected, and really integrate that with the other components, the other instruments of national power in a deterrence strategy. So logistics, while often overlooked, certainly by the Russians, as we're seeing in Ukraine, I had to get that dig in, is important to our strategy, even in a non-combat deterrence posture, as we are in CENTCOM. In terms of women in logistics, I think, as Katie mentioned, when we all came in the military, probably around 20 years ago, there weren't as many career field choices. Logistics appealed to me because of the broad choices. You could do quartermaster functions, you could do maintenance, ordnance, transportation. And during my time, we saw the first female 4-star general in General Ann Dunwoody, which was one of the people that paved the way, achieved that rank, and showed what was possible. For a logistician, a non-combat arms person. So again, that's why I think, to take it full circle, that's the importance of today, to recognize people like that, the trailblazers, as well as the normal people like us that are out there doing the good work, and those aspiring to come up and looking for representation, seeing someone that looks like them in those positions.
Thank you, Melissa. Katie, to your point about the skill of negotiation of females, we have a comment from Jacqueline Alley from the Naval War College, which I'm happy to share. Thanks for your very important panel. You're welcome. For anyone interested, 2 civilian examples of extraordinary women negotiators are Nobel laureate Lema Gbowie from Liberia and Betty Bigombe of Uganda. So it just sort of reinforces your point about that skill, Katie. In the last 15 minutes, I want to get to, which is going to be a challenging part, but it's incredibly necessary. I want to get to the recommendations, to some of the solutions, some of the ways that you can actually achieve change. So the question is broad, but feel free to take it in any direction you want. I'm going to go to all 3 of you. So what are some of the things the United States government and the broader public policy community can do to affect change? And perhaps on a more limited local level, how do you change things up for the better? So Katie, let's start with you.
Thanks. I'll try to tackle some of this and then we can kind of go around the horn again.
Yep.
A couple of things that I've been thinking about just as everyone spoke is, the importance of picking partners. So, I work at Special Operations Command right now, and a lot of that is built around, training partner forces to act with us or on our behalf, in conflict or conflict prevention. And a lot of that in the past has been, you go to what you know, and you go and partner with an infantry unit or an armor unit and help them become better, to protect us. And I think that looking at the types of conflict that we are going to probably endure in the future, more in the strategic competition realm, it will be critical that we start identifying different types of partner units. And I think that this is where women come into play. It's going into these countries and helping them if they don't have units that have a lot of women in them, identifying if there's a place for that, if there is a gap for that. And then even more outside the combat arms type of units, it's identifying people that can serve in primary staff positions, in leadership positions, and in advisory positions to leaders. I'm sure that Aaron and Melissa have their own stories, but I would say that I'm here today because of men that have taken a risk on me. I commissioned as a logistician as well, and then I became a strategist. I had none of the badging or the normal accoutrements that come with looking like a high-speed Army officer, right? I'm a good runner, but I'm not stacked here to here with all of the things that prove that you are a physical warrior. But I always worked really hard, and I had some leaders taking a chance on me early in my career and say, oh, you have some skills that we could use at the battalion staff level. And then that turned into a bigger job, and slowly but surely, I'm sitting here as the head of plans, and a job that definitely is not coded for me. I will tell you that. And my peers don't look like me, but we have an incredible camaraderie, and it's because of the diverse opinions around the table. And every day we walk out, and I think as a command in general, we've come a lot further because we have different voices, around the table when we're making decisions. So I think that we need to take that to our partners and help them understand that that is probably one of the gaps in a lot of their military structures.
Katie, what did you mean by it wasn't coded for me?
So with each, officer position in the military, it will say the type of branch you have, so infantry, and then the rank that comes with it. So infantry 06, which is a full bird colonel. So if you work in a special operations command, a primary staff position, the code for that usually would be special forces officer, full bird colonel, right? And I had a couple of bosses that said, hey, you're the best planner right now in the headquarters, so why don't you go do that plans job? And you're like, really? Are you sure? And if they hadn't taken that chance, I wouldn't be in that job, and there wouldn't be females underneath me, calling and saying, hey, how do we do that job? I didn't know that was even an option. And that's how that, hey, we are pushing the ball down the field when people below you, want to go into that job, and hopefully it will get recoded to be best person for the job.
Copy. Thank you for clarifying. Melissa?
Based on Katie's discussion, I wanted to pull out 2 really separate thoughts. The first was on the security cooperation, working with partners and allies. And I like the idea. I've seen partners struggle with things like logistics, like intelligence. If you look at what we kept behind when we started pulling combat forces out of theaters like Afghanistan, we continue to provide them logistics, we continue to provide them intelligence, and a lot of our partners struggle with those very things. They also happen to be career fields that have a lot of women in them, but they're not as exciting as combat arms. So we continue to send teams overseas to do small unit tactics and infantry tactics and roll tanks through the desert and in big combat exercises. To me, that doesn't make sense when a lot of our partners struggle with intelligence, logistics, strategic planning. And so I think in engaging women and leaders in those fields to do that security cooperation with our partners and allies, and whether they're partnering with men or women in those partner armies and militaries, is somewhat irrelevant, but also through programs like IMET, International Military Education and Training, I think we should also be focusing, and there are requirements or at least goals to bring certain percentages of partners and allies to our schoolhouses, and targets for a certain amount of them to be women. So I think more work to be done there, but great focus areas. The second thought I had on what we could do at a local level is really be better mentors. And if you don't have a mentor, go find one.
That's what I tell my interns.
Yeah, I always struggled with that. I think the collective, we think that we have to necessarily look like the people we mentor. But I don't think it should be that way. I don't have to have a female mentor, and I don't necessarily only have to mentor females.
Right.
Find people you have something in common with, whether you both like the Boston Red Sox, or you both love basketball, or you have the same leadership philosophy, or you grew up in the same town or the same area, and ask that person to be your mentor. And if they're good, stick with them. And then as leaders, seek out people that have common interests. If I'm a planner and there's someone that, as Katie said, is interested, how do I get that job? I didn't know that was open. Spend the time at a local level. And I think that's how change happens. That's how you make the difference.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, Melissa. Just yesterday, I had a career talk with interns, and on that list of 5 things I shared with them was find a mentor. So if you don't believe me, interns, just listen to Melissa.
Yeah, just ask.
Because she's
I've
exactly
never
right.
had anyone said, no, I don't want to be your mentor.
Exactly. You'll be surprised how willing people are to help you out, and put aside their egos. Aaron, I'm going to come back to the issue of Afghanistan in a minute, but Aaron, I want to give you the chance to respond to that as well.
Yeah, I also started out my career as a logistician, and I think that is probably indicative of just where we were when the 3 of us entered the military versus where we are now. I actually had the opportunity to meet Katie's stepdaughter, and when she told me she was a Cab Scout, I mean, I got goosebumps, right? So, we talk about change is slow, but it's definitely happening. One thing that Katie said that I think is incredibly important to touch upon, I eventually switched over to special operations where, unlike when I was a logistician, there were definitely a lot more women. There were very few women when I switched over to special operations. And also even on the civilian side, when I started out as a policy analyst in Solic, I was one of only, I would say, 3 women in the office. I was the only woman in my directorate. So just the idea of male allies, like I definitely have benefited in my career, I would say, from the mentorship and sponsorship of men, more so than the mentorship and sponsorship of women. Unfortunately, studies have shown that women don't sponsor other women the way that men sponsor men. I mean, this was the whole premise of Lean In, right? So I am certainly the beneficiary of male allies. And I think that it's important to recognize that this cannot be a conversation had only, with women, that it's going to take male allies if we're going to make sustainable, lasting change. And so, I am very thankful to the men who were willing to sponsor me and mentor me. I certainly wouldn't be here today without them. And then, to Melissa's point, I think it's a 2-way street. I think that, you have to recognize if you have talent in your organization that perhaps your mentee is not going to look like you, and that, you know, there are barriers to cross-gender mentorship, certainly. And I think we have to be willing to acknowledge that and overcome that. But one thing I will say about things that we can do at the localized level, I mean, I think if you are a senior leader in the Department of Defense, certainly look around your table, right? Next time you hold a meeting, look around your table. And if you are not seeing a group of people that is diverse in, you know, background, experience, that should come across as problematic to you. You know, we talk about how I think at the strategic level, we have internalized the importance of having equal representation, but I certainly can't say that perhaps at the more local levels, we've done that. You know, and, you know, the plural of anecdote is not data, but being a woman in SOF, I have been singular many, many times, even today. And so I think that truly senior leaders have a responsibility to push at, you know, the very lowest levels to create teams that are not homogenous.
Well, Cornelia makes the point about the importance of not just having a mentor, but also a sponsor. So I think you just hit the nail on the head, Erin. And just for those in the audience who are not experts in this topic and not as familiar about the difference between the two, could any one of you just elaborate what the main difference is between having a mentor, but also a sponsor in the U.S. military?
Yeah, I think just definition wise, a mentor, you know, a mentor might be someone who you go to for advice, right, versus a sponsor who is actually willing to, I think, help you perhaps, you know, speak on your behalf, or perhaps to Katie's point, say, hey, like, I want to take a vested interest in helping you achieve specific career goals in a way that a mentor might not, right? And so I think sponsorship just implies action on your behalf.
Is there a financial aspect to it too, or no? Not necessarily.
I've never had a sponsor where there's been financial
as in an
aspect.
institution sponsoring you, right?
Perhaps, but I think just at a very local level, like when we're talking about like a one-on-one personal relationship, there definitely is a difference between like a mentor who you might just go to for advice versus a sponsor who is going to pull you along with them as they move up and take a vested interest in your career, perhaps in a way that a mentor might not.
Copy. Okay. We have a few more minutes, 3 or 4 maybe. I want to take one last question also from Cornelia, even though I will submit to you that it is an open-ended question. So feel free to take it in any direction you want. We'll try to incorporate the topic that we're discussing today. What are your views on Afghanistan? So Katie, any direction you want to take this? And if you're not ready, I can go to Melissa. Up to you.
Yeah, definitely an open-ended question. I mean, I think that Afghanistan, as you know, everyone's seen for the past, you know, almost 40 years, it's an incredibly difficult environment. It's both complex and complicated. I think it will continue to be. I think we have to watch it, keep a very, very close eye on the dynamics there over the next 5 to 10 years. The threats that emanate out of there have not ceased, just because we don't have the amount of people that we had there. But, you know, if we tie it back into the kind of women, peace and security apparatus, you know, the Department of Defense is definitely not the only organization that was, is, or will be involved in Afghanistan going forward. So I hope that, you know, we can learn some of the lessons that we wrote about in this article and start to form, you know, partnerships later on with maybe female leaders. And I know that's probably a stretch, but one can have hope.
Very well said. Melissa?
I'll keep it short because most of my personal experience were deployments and time spent in the Arabian Peninsula, particularly in Iraq. Not as much in Afghanistan, but like Katie said, my hope is that the time we spent there and the influence we had on the society, and particularly the women, provides them with the tools necessary to make their society better. I know up against a lot of challenges, but hoping for not a complete reversion to where they were 20 years ago. And definitely, while we don't have that physical presence, we can keep an eye, certainly from afar.
Copy. Thank you. Erin, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think Katie and Melissa covered it.
Copy. Well, I guess I lied. I have one last question. This is it. And this could be very, very short. Who is your favorite female leader? Doesn't have to be American. And if all of you say Angela Merkel, that's fine with me. But if you have other candidates, by all means. Katie.
I would say Madeleine Albright is the first one that comes to mind. I still read her stuff, follow her closely, and I think that her talent for negotiating and the experience that she brought with her and was able to articulate to a table of sharp elbows is something to be emulated.
You can't go wrong with Secretary Albright for sure. Melissa.
I'll go with General Dunwoody. I think her experience mirrors, in a lot of ways, our experiences, although she certainly was up against a lot more challenges and had a lot more firsts, and that paved the way for the rest of us.
And Erin?
I'm also gonna double tap Katie's. There is this quote that I think of often that is attributed to Madeleine Albright, and it's that, I'm going to paraphrase, but we will have achieved equality when mediocre women have the same opportunities as mediocre men. And I think about that a lot sometimes.
Oh, okay.
But on that note,
Let's hope all the changes that you are suggesting will materialize sooner rather than later. I want to thank all three of you for being with me today. And it's been such a privilege, really, to be your colleagues also in the program, but also to moderate this very, very important discussion. I know that it doesn't end here, but for now, we're going to have to end it. Once again, thanks a lot, and see you very much soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye.